Lavinia Kingsley laid her palm flat over the marriage articles. A breath away, Henrietta Rushworth's quill stopped its descent toward the signature line still bearing her elder sister's name. Minutes later, after Lavinia had struck that name out and added a covenant securing a separate residence and annuity. After one season, the young baron refused the altered terms and left her standing alone before the vicar. Then Cuthbert, Duke of Carrowmore, rose from the opposite pew and crossed the church toward the place his enemy had abandoned. His boots rang over the flagstones. The baron had not yet reached the side aisle. He turned at the sound, astonishment hardening his face, while whispers stirred through the pews. Cuthbert stopped beside Lavinia, exactly where the other man had stood. Lavinia kept both hands around her small white bouquet. She would not look grateful merely because one gentleman had walked toward the space another had left. Cuthbert looked at the amended articles on the vicar's book. "Have you read the final clause, Your Grace?" she asked. "I have. And I will not ask you to strike it." The vicar found his voice. "Your Grace, the license names another gentleman. I cannot simply I know." Cuthbert turned to him. "You will perform no ceremony upon the wrong license." Then he faced Lavinia again and extended one hand palm open between them. He did not take hers. "My solicitor will obtain the proper license. The articles will bear your name and mine. Your clauses remain. When the papers are lawful, I will return to this place." His gaze held hers. "If you wish me here." The open hand mattered more than the title. He had crossed the church, but he had not crossed the last foot between them. Only minutes earlier, Henrietta had urged her to sign first and correct the papers later. Lavinia had untied the dark green ribbon, struck out her sister's name, added the separate use provision, a modest jointure, and the one-season covenant, then signed Lavinia Kingsley. "The congregation is waiting," Henrietta had whispered. "The congregation is not marrying him." The baron had read those terms at the altar, called her a substitute who prepared her retreat before her vows, and stepped away. Now the clause he rejected was the first condition Cuthbert accepted. Lavinia looked at his waiting hand, but did not take it. "I will read every line again. I should expect nothing less. If one word has been altered without my consent, there will be no wedding. Then there will be no wedding." The baron, still near the aisle, stared at him. "I will wait for the proper license," Lavinia said. Cuthbert lowered his hand with a single nod. No man would marry her that morning. That question was settled. A harder one had taken its place, whether the Duke who honored her terms before a church full of witnesses would still honor them when there was no audience at all. The lawful ceremony took place the following afternoon. There was no crowd this time, only Henrietta Matilda Watham, Cuthbert's solicitor, and the witnesses the church required. The new license bore the right names. The articles lay on the vicar's book, with Lavinia's clauses copied cleanly into the final draft. Cuthbert had not visited her in the hours between ceremonies. He had sent no flowers and no sentimental note. He had sent the papers with a short instruction to her solicitor: examine every alteration on Miss Kingsley's behalf before she signs. Lavinia read them twice. The separate use trust remained. The jointure remained. So did the one-season covenant. Marriage would not cease after a season. Her right to an independent residence and annuity would begin then if she chose to use it. She touched the last page. "My family." Cuthbert waited. "They are not part of your purchase." His eyes sharpened. "There is no purchase. Then if they come to Carrowmore, they come as invited relations, not as debts you acquired with me. Visitors," he said, "if they are invited." It was an austere answer, almost stern. Lavinia found it easier to trust than generosity without edges. She signed. When the vows were done and the register completed, Henrietta hurried forward with a relieved breath. "At last. When I write to your sister, you will not use her sister's name as another name for my wife." Cuthbert had not spoken loudly. He did not need to. He looked from Henrietta to his steward. Her Grace is Lavinia. That is the name used in my house. She is not a replacement for anyone. Make certain the household understands me. Henrietta's mouth tightened, but she bowed. Something in Lavinia eased, not because he had praised her, and not because the title now attached to her. He had taken the smallest point over which everyone else had argued, and made it plain enough for a footman to obey. Outside, the Norfolk afternoon was cold and bright. Cuthbert offered his arm for the church steps. This time, Lavinia took it. Carrowmore waited beyond the road, along with a dead duchess's rooms, a duke's habits and a household that had spent years learning where every person belonged. Lavinia had secured her name on paper. She had yet to discover whether the house could make room for the woman who carried it. During her first week, Lavinia learned that Carrowmore kept memory with the discipline of a garrison. No servant openly questioned her place. The uncertainty was quieter than that. A pair of maids stopped speaking when she passed the closed principal suite. A footman looked from Lavinia to its mahogany doors and lowered his eyes a fraction too late. No one was insolent. They were simply waiting to learn where the new Duchess ought to fit. On the third morning, Matilda led her along the private corridor and opened a pair of mahogany doors. The Duchess's rooms. The words were offered as courtesy. Lavinia heard the assumption inside them. The suite smelled of lavender beeswax and a fire that had not yet been lit. Fresh coal waited in the grate. White roses stood before a small portrait on the writing desk. The furniture was handsome, dark, and undisturbed, as though the late Duchess might return and be annoyed to find a drawer moved. Matilda spoke gently. Everything has been kept very nearly as it was. Lavinia crossed to the window, then back to the doorway. A new wife could inhabit the rooms. She could sleep in another woman's bedchamber, write at another woman's desk, and be congratulated for fitting the space. She had already been offered that arrangement once at an altar. Cuthbert appeared at the far end of the corridor with an estate ledger beneath one arm. He stopped when he saw them. Matilda turned. I was showing her Grace the suite. It is available, he said. Only that. Not yours. Not proper, not expected. Lavinia left the preserved rooms and walked farther along the passage. The east room was smaller. Its curtains were faded, its carpet plain, but morning light filled the window, and no portrait waited upon the desk. She opened the door wider. I will have this one. Matilda blinked. Your Grace, the principal suite has always... This one has no one waiting inside it. The words came out quieter than Lavinia intended. Cuthbert's gaze moved once from her face to the empty room. Have a fire laid, he told Matilda. And send her writing desk here. Matilda hesitated. But the family may expect the family does not sleep here. That ended it. Lavinia looked into the room again. There was no declaration, no demand that she explain herself. By noon, a writing desk stood below the east window. Her books had arrived, and the coal fire had begun to warm the plain walls. That afternoon, the steward came carrying the household keys on a heavy iron ring. As mistress of Carrowmore, your Grace. Lavinia looked at them. Pantry plate cupboard, linen rooms, wine cellar storerooms, doors whose names she did not yet know. The iron ring represented authority, but also a whole inherited machinery she had not asked to command on her first day. Her hands went still. Cuthbert was in the corridor reading a memorandum. He glanced up. Tell her what each key opens, he said to the steward. Nothing more. The man obeyed. When he reached the polished brass key to the east room, Lavinia touched it with one finger. That one. The steward's brows rose. Only this one, your Grace, for now. The previous Duchess carried the full ring. There it was again, a dead woman offered as instruction. Before Lavinia could search for the exact sentence, Cuthbert closed his ledger. Then the full ring remains with the housekeeper until her Grace asks for another. No impatience, no wounded pride. He merely removed the comparison from the decision. The steward detached the brass key and placed it in Lavinia's hand. Later, when the corridor was empty, she found Cuthbert near the stairs. "You make orders very quickly," she said. "So I have been told. I dislike being ordered. So I have observed." That almost made her smile. She turned the brass key between her fingers. "I do not dislike that one." He looked at the key, then at her. "It was your order." For the first time since the church, Lavinia understood what drew her attention back to him. Cuthbert's authority did not become gentler when he used it for her. It became exact. When he believed a choice was hers, he could make the whole house leave it alone. The discovery was both reassuring and dangerous. A woman might learn to enjoy being heard. By the second week, Carrowmore began to change in places too small for gossip to notice. The first rebellion concerned silver. Lavinia entered the breakfast room and found a towering epergne in the center of the little table. All branching arms, crystal dishes, and polished fruit leaves. When Cuthbert sat opposite her, the ornament swallowed him from the shoulders up. Matilda came around it with the toast rack was forced to reverse direction by a footman with coffee, and nearly collided with the sideboard. "Must it remain there?" Lavinia asked. Matilda looked alarmed. Her Grace always preferred the breakfast table set so. Lavinia looked at her. Matilda coloured. "The late Duchess." "Across the silver Cuthbert said. "Has it been moved?" "No," Lavinia answered. "That is the difficulty. Matilda has made 3 journeys around it, and I am speaking to a silver pineapple." A pause. Cuthbert leaned left. Lavinia leaned right. Their eyes met around a crystal bowl. He looked toward the footman. "Put it on the sideboard." The epergne departed with considerable ceremony. Suddenly there was air between them. Lavinia lifted her teacup. "Will the estate endure?" "The estate has requested an hour." His face remained perfectly grave. The laugh escaped her before she could prevent it. Cuthbert looked surprised, then pleased, though only in the slight loosening at the corner of his mouth. The next morning the epergne stayed on the sideboard. In the 3rd week, Matilda brought them to the old nursery day room. Holland covers hid most of the furniture. Porcelain toys stood dusty on shelves, while a wooden rocking horse in the corner bore worn paint where many small hands had gripped it. "I cannot decide whether everything ought to be preserved or packed away," Matilda confessed. Cuthbert frowned at the covered room. "Choose one." Lavinia ran her thumb over the smooth wooden handle of the horse. Why, he looked at her. "Because keeping half a room and storing half a room will make nonsense of the inventory." She lifted a dusty porcelain shepherdess, then set it back. "The nonsense is already here. That has never been played with. This has." She nudged the horse. It rocked once, its wooden runner knocking softly against the floor. "The nieces and nephews can use the horse and the blocks. Store the display pieces. Leave the worn things where children may reach them." Cuthbert's brow stayed furrowed. "The steward will complain. Then tell him to write an honest inventory." Matilda covered a smile. Cuthbert glanced at her. "You appear to be enjoying this." "Immensely." He looked back at Lavinia. "Amend the inventory." She began to understand his humor. It lived in surrender that pretended to be administration. By the 4th week, frost silvered the lawns, and a pane cracked in the winter garden. Cuthbert arrived to find the head gardener fretting over a row of myrtles, and at once began ordering men to carry half the collection into the house. Lavinia stood beneath the damaged pane, wrapped in a wool shawl. Cold air touched one side of her face. She examined the nearest pots. One myrtle was already black at the tips. 2 more stood directly in the draught. The others were merely chilled. "1 pane," she said. 2 pots. Then wait until morning." Cuthbert stopped halfway through an instruction. "Are you certain no?" That surprised him more than contradiction would have done. Lavinia looked again at the leaves. "Moving all of them may do more harm than the cold. Seal the pane. Move the two nearest. By morning we shall know more. For several seconds the glass ticked softly above them. Then Cuthbert turned to the gardener. Do that. Most of the plants recovered. The next morning he found Lavinia in the same glass house and pointed to the green leaves without triumph. You were right. I was fortunate. No. You were careful with what you did not know. The compliment warmed her more than the weak winter sun. It was exactly the sort he would give, not pretty but accurate. At the end of the 5th week, the east room chimney coughed a black cloud into the passage just as supper was being carried upstairs. The steward appeared horrified. The formal dining room can be opened at once, Your Grace. Cuthbert glanced toward the corridor leading to it. Memorial Week preparations had already begun there. Black linen polished plate, old seating plans. His mouth opened. Then he looked at Lavinia instead. Where do you intend to eat? She considered the smoke-the-covered dishes and the card table in the adjoining library. There. 2 plates will fit if you surrender 1 stack of estate papers. Cuthbert followed her gaze. Those papers have precedence. They have occupied that table since October. Then they may supervise the soup. He carried 1 stack to the floor himself. They ate elbow to elbow with an agricultural report beside the bread basket and an inkwell dangerously near the gravy. When Lavinia measured the remaining pile with her hand and announced that the soup tureen had won by ½ an inch, Cuthbert laughed once, low and unexpected. The sound changed the room. The chimney still smoked, the papers were inconvenient, and Cuthbert stole the last roasted onion from her plate while claiming ducal privilege. Lavinia took it back. More than the church, that small theft made marriage feel capable of ordinary life. She kept the thought to herself. Beyond the library door, servants were preparing the house for the late Duchess's Memorial Week. Lavinia had altered breakfasts, toys, plants, and 1 smoky supper. She had not yet touched the custom. Cuthbert believed duty required him to preserve exactly. The memorial dinner was laid 3 days later. Lavinia entered the formal dining room while servants were setting the last pieces of plate and stopped near the threshold. A high-backed chair at the center had been draped in black velvet. Opposite it stood the late Duchess's portrait, brought down from the upper corridor. Lavinia's own card had been placed at the side of the table in the position given to a respectful secondary guest. Her hands became still against her skirt. The arrangement was honorable. That was what made it cruel. At the church, an absent sister's place had waited for Lavinia. Here, an absent wife occupied the center, while Lavinia was given whatever remained. Cuthbert came in behind the steward reading the order of service. He glanced once at the table and nodded. Approved. Lavinia waited until the steward had heard it. You crossed a church to keep me from standing in another woman's place, Your Grace, she said. Do not put me there now. Cuthbert turned. The memorial is an observance of respect. It is not about you, Lavinia. That is precisely the difficulty. She looked at her side card. Neither is my place. His eyes followed hers. For a moment his expression did not change. Then he looked again. The draped central chair, the portrait. The card bearing the name he had once ordered the whole household to use correctly. 2 elderly relations of his late wife had entered behind him. One made a sound of protest. Cuthbert, surely you will not alter the memorial because cancel the seating order, he said. The steward froze. The memorial remains. The chapel wreath remains, but her grace is Lavinia, and no ceremony in this house will make her a guest at her own table. Remove the velvet. Remove the cards. The older women protested at once. One accused him of forgetting the dead. The other said the county would think remarriage had made him faithless. Cuthbert did not explain himself. He did not ask Lavinia to say she had not meant so much. He let the criticism land on him. Lavinia watched with the same care she had used at the altar. An apology spoken privately would have been easy. A corrected order heard by the same servants who had heard the first one was harder. Still, she was not finished. Who decides what replaces it? His gaze returned to hers. You do if you choose. Matilda can tell you what has been done before. That answer cost him more than cancelling a chair. It meant he would not merely approve a new arrangement after Lavinia built it. He would let the meaning of the memorial leave his hands. Over the next 2 days, Matilda brought the memorial objects to the East Room one at a time. Lavinia did not hide them all. That would have allowed the dead woman to rule by absence just as surely as the old ceremony had ruled by display. She kept one portrait in the upper corridor. The chapel wreath would continue each year. A small prayer book that had belonged to the late Duchess returned to the family cabinet. The empty ceremonial chair did not return to the dining room. Matilda stood beside the desk, uncertain. His Grace may wish the portrait below on the anniversary. Cuthbert had come to the doorway after being asked a simple question about the prayer book's family inscription. He answered that question and nothing else. Matilda turned to him. Do you agree with the changes? Your Grace. Cuthbert looked at Lavinia. It is not my ruling. The words were plain. Lavinia felt them settle more deeply than any tender phrase could have done. That evening she found herself laying 2 glasses on the small table by the east window. She stared at them for a long moment. Then she wrote a note. At 7 precisely, Cuthbert appeared at her door without paper secretary or steward. He stopped at the threshold until she pointed to the chair opposite hers. Tonight, Lavinia said, I would rather you were here than elsewhere. His eyes rested on her face. That is sufficient. He sat. There was no discussion of the one-season covenant. No question about what the invitation promised tomorrow. They ate roasted fowl and potatoes while the fire clicked behind them. When she passed him the plate, their fingers touched. Lavinia could have withdrawn at once. She did not. Cuthbert did not close his hand over hers. He merely took the plate when she released it. Others had often mistaken Lavinia's silence for consent. Cuthbert did not, and an invitation no longer felt like surrender. When he left at 10, he paused by the door. Tomorrow, she almost answered too quickly, merely because he had asked in the tone of a man accustomed to schedules. Then she considered what she wanted. Not tomorrow. Friday. Friday. He left without disappointment. Lavinia turned the brass key after him and smiled at the quiet click. 3 days after the memorial dinner, a carriage bearing the Kingsley crest rolled into Carrowmore's court. Henrietta entered the great hall with 2 of Lavinia's cousins and a leather portfolio beneath her arm. We have come before the settlement review closes, she announced. The London drafts must be restored to the terms originally agreed. The Duke's gesture at the church was impressive, Lavinia, but it does not alter what you are. Servants were near enough to hear. Henrietta struck the portfolio against her palm. You are the second bride. You owe this family the obligations intended for the first. The phrase reached Lavinia more cleanly than the rest. Second bride. Beside her, Cuthbert went motionless. His gaze shifted to the bell pull. Lavinia knew what would follow. Footmen opened doors, a carriage ordered back to the road letters to solicitors before supper. His hand closed around the cord. Lavinia covered it with hers. He looked down, then at her. I can end this tonight, he said. I know. His fingers remained on the cord. I need you not to. That was harder for him than anger. She saw it. What do you need a council tomorrow morning? In the library. I want every claim said once where I can answer it. Henrietta gave a contemptuous laugh. And the Duke will sit at your shoulder to frighten us into agreement. Lavinia did not look away from Cuthbert. When I have made my decision, I need you to see it obeyed. Before then, I need you to give no order that removes them. His hand loosened. He released the bell pull. Tomorrow at 10, he told the steward. The library. That was all. Henrietta had expected protection to prove Lavinia weak. Instead, Cuthbert stepped back from the very power that might have made the accusation seem true. As the family was shown away to the guest rooms, Lavinia remained in the hall. Cuthbert said you could have let me send them away. Yes. You may regret not doing so. Probably. His mouth shifted. She looked at him. Do not enjoy that. That I enjoy accuracy. So do I. The answer steadied her more than reassurance would have. The next morning, the dark green ribbon lay on the library table beside the portfolio Henrietta had brought. Lavinia set the current marriage articles beneath her hand and took the chair at the head. Cuthbert chose a place to one side. He did not open the meeting. Henrietta opened the portfolio first. These clauses were agreed when your sister was to marry the Baron, she said. Access to timber revenues, assistance to the Kingsley dependents, and the understandings between the two houses. You profited when his grace took his enemy's place. You cannot accept the advantage and refuse the obligation. Lavinia untied the dark green ribbon. The silk made the same faint sound it had made in the vestry. She opened the current articles. No, she said. I cannot accept a marriage written for one woman and pretend it governs another. One cousin shifted impatiently. Henrietta pushed the older draft nearer. Read that clause. Lavinia did. It was the provision concerning the other alliance, the one negotiated for a bride who had never stood at this table and a groom who had walked away from the altar. She laid it flat. That belonged to a marriage that never happened. Henrietta turned to Cuthbert. Your Grace, surely you agree that family obligations cannot be discarded because she dislikes the language. Cuthbert did not move. You asked the wrong person. The room changed. Not loudly. No one gasped. But Henrietta's hand stopped on the portfolio, and Lavinia felt the shift as surely as if a chair had been moved beneath her. She read her own articles aloud. The separate use provision, the jointure, the annuity, the right after one season to maintain a separate residence if she chose. Then she closed the pages. These stand. Any provision belonging solely to my sister's proposed marriage does not. Henrietta's face reddened. You speak as though blood means nothing. I am saying it does not mean everything. You were brought to that church because your family needed you. Yes? And the Duke married you because his enemy would not. Lavinia looked down at the ribbon, then at the brass key lying against the fold of her skirt. Once she might have searched too long for the perfect answer. Not now. I went to the church because I chose to keep the people dependent on my family from paying for my sister's flight. I signed only after the terms became mine. His Grace stood beside me only after the first man refused them. She lifted her eyes. Those facts do not make me anyone's substitute. Henrietta scoffed. Then what precisely do you choose? That was the question Lavinia had needed from the beginning. Until the season ends, I choose Carrowmore as my home. When the covenant matures, I shall choose again. The trust and jointure remain. The residence provision remains. No claim made in my sister's name will be added to my marriage. One cousin stared at her. Henrietta said, That is obedience to neither family. No. Lavinia placed one palm on the articles. It is a marriage. Silence held for a breath. Cuthbert still did not speak. Henrietta swung toward him. Will you truly permit this? He looked at Lavinia. Is that your ruling? It is. Cuthbert rose. The articles stand as Her Grace has read them. My steward and solicitor will recognize no instruction that contradicts them, and no demand enters this house under her sister's name. Anyone unable to observe that may leave Carrowmore and remain away. The steward standing near the library door bowed once deeply enough that the acknowledgement could not be mistaken. Henrietta saw it. Henrietta went white. You would break the connection for this. For nothing, Cuthbert said, except refusing to pretend my wife is someone else. There was no speech about love, No threat of ruin. He simply accepted the break. Henrietta gathered the older draft with hands that shook. At the door, she turned to Lavinia. "You will find yourself alone here." Lavinia thought of the East Room, the key in her pocket, the breakfast table without the silver monument, the rocking horse left for living children, and a man who had just waited until she gave him a decision before he used his title. "No," she said. "I shall simply be myself." The door closed behind the Kingsleys. Only then did Lavinia feel the strain leave her shoulders. Cuthbert remained beside his chair. "I will have the older instructions returned to your aunt." "Thank you. Nothing else. Nothing else." He accepted that too. They left the library together. At the turn toward the east wing, he kept half a pace behind her. Lavinia noticed. In the hall, he had once been ready to end the quarrel with one pull of a bell. Now he did not even assume he was invited through her door. At the East Room threshold, he stopped. "Your room," he said. He meant, "I will leave you to it." Lavinia took out the brass key and turned it in the lock. The door opened upon the plain room she had chosen in her first week, the desk at the window, the small sofa, the fire-no portrait waiting for her to become someone else. Cuthbert stepped back. "Wait." He did. Lavinia pushed the door wider. "For tonight," she said, "yours too, if you are willing to sit." His expression changed almost imperceptibly. The command left his posture before he crossed the threshold. "I am." He entered and sat on the sofa only after she indicated the place beside her. For a time, neither spoke. Lavinia did not need to explain what the council had cost her. Cuthbert did not tell her what she ought to feel, now that it was over. She rested her hand on the cushion between them. After a moment, she turned it palm upward. Cuthbert looked at it before he touched her. His hand was warm, firm, still. Lavinia leaned back and watched the coal settle in the grate. At the church, he had crossed a room before hundreds of eyes. This was the greater proof, when no one watched, he could remain exactly where she had asked him to be. One season later, autumn rain tapped against the East Room windows, while Lavinia read a letter from her solicitor. The covenant had matured. Her independent annuity was secured. Funds for a separate residence were available whenever she wished to use them. Nothing in the notice required Cuthbert's permission, and nothing in it vanished if she remained his wife beneath another roof. Lavinia read the letter twice. She pulled a clean sheet of paper toward her and uncapped the ink. For one breath, she let the practical sequence arrange itself. Write to her solicitor. Choose the house, have the trunks packed. Leave before staying could ever be mistaken for obligation. Her pen hovered above the blank page. Nothing in the thought frightened her. More importantly, nothing compelled her. Leaving was possible. It no longer had to be the proof that she was free. Lavinia set the pen down. Months ago, the clause had been a door she could use if she needed it. Now its value lay elsewhere. She could stay without being trapped by staying. She opened the bottom drawer of her desk. The marriage articles rested there, still tied with the dark green ribbon. One edge had frayed slightly over the season. She folded the solicitor's notice beneath the ribbon and tied it loosely around both documents. She did not burn the letter. She did not tear up the right it confirmed. She simply closed the drawer. That evening she asked for supper in the East Room with Cuthbert and Matilda. A young footman brought in 3 chairs. By habit, he carried the heaviest carved one toward the head of the small round table. Lavinia looked up. "No, Thomas. Leave that one by the wall." He stopped at once. Cuthbert had just reached the doorway. He said nothing. Lavinia crossed to a plain chair matching her own. She lifted it, carried it to the table, and set it beside her place so their elbows would nearly touch. The chair legs rasped softly over the floorboards. "There." Matilda lowered her eyes to hide a smile. Cuthbert looked at the empty head of the table, and then at the chair Lavinia had chosen for him. The estate may object, he said. Lavinia rested her hand on the chair back. The brass key to the east room hung at her waist. It has had a season to recover. Cuthbert sat beside her. The footman set down the soup. Matilda began telling them about a nephew who had broken one of the nursery blocks and then hidden the pieces beneath the rocking horse. Cuthbert immediately asked whether the inventory had been corrected. Lavinia glanced at him. He caught the look. An honest inventory, I believe, was the rule. It was an observation. It sounded remarkably like an order. Then you are improving. Matilda laughed. Outside Carrowmore's old trees bent in the wind. Inside, no empty chair governed the table. The late Duchess's portrait remained where history belonged. The Kingsley papers held no authority over Lavinia's name, and the right to another residence waited undamaged in her desk. None of those things required her to leave. None required her to stay. Lavinia reached for the bread. Cuthbert moved the dish toward her without ceremony, then stole the last roasted onion from her plate. She took it back. The house settled around the small sound of cutlery, conversation, and 3 chairs placed for 3 living people.